welcome to today's podcast. I'm Granny Rhea.
And I'm Auntie Donia.
And we're here to talk about super special kids and cake.
Yes, cake!
We're coming to you from the studios of Sacred Heart University in Fairfield, Connecticut. This podcast is brought to you by our book, Let's Talk, Social Communicative Services and Supports for Your Young Child with ASD, published by Paul H. Brooks and available from Amazon.
Our super special topic this week has to do with developing positive relationships with the people who work with your child. If you've got a super special child, you know there are lots of people in your life. Some of them are therapists, some of them are teachers, some of them are medical professionals, and it's a lot of people to get along with. If your child is under 3, they may be coming to your house, and you may not be so happy about having all those invaders coming to your house and telling you what to do and where your child can go and where your other children can go. It can be very stressful. And even if your child is in school, then you have the problem of communicating with people that you don't see very often. All those obstacles make coordinating with the team that works with your child sometimes a very difficult obstacle.
But to get the best out of the people that you're working with and to really establish a positive relationship, I think it's important to know who they are and what they do, because sometimes I think it can be really confusing when your super special kid is seeing an occupational therapist or a speech and language pathologist or a neurodevelopmental pediatrician. I think we talk about that in our book, Granny Rhea.
We do. We have a list of all the different professions that very often work with super special kids and define what their roles are and so on. And some people might find that useful to take a look at. But I think the really important thing is to think about how you as a parent can forge the kind of relationships with all these individuals that can support your child's learning and development. Sometimes it takes some effort. It might not be easy because they're busy or they don't have the time set aside to talk with you, or some of the times they're just difficult to talk to. But it really is important to take the time to establish some kind of connection with them so that they know how invested you are in your child, and you can get from them the expertise and experience that they've had in helping children like yours.
And remember, you are the expert on your super special kid. You know your child better than anyone else. And the person working with your child is an expert in their field. So we've spoken about the importance of communicating for our children. It's also really important to be able to communicate openly and honestly with your team. So if you don't understand something they've written in their report, it's okay to say, I don't understand this. If they've made a recommendation that isn't realistic, you can say to them, that's not realistic. There's no way that I can spend 45 minutes 3 times a week with my child, and they'll help you think of something else. So I think part of it is establishing a relationship of trust, being able to communicate openly. And one of the things that I often recommend to parents is that they keep a notebook where they write those questions down, where they make a note of who that person is and what their role is, and then the specific questions for them.
That's a great idea, Auntie Donia, and I think it does take effort, and it is a little bit hard. But if you think about the people that you interact with in the course of your life, few of them are going to have as big an impact as the team that works with your child. And it really just makes sense to spend the time and effort to get to know them a little bit. Now, my brother was a super special adult. I don't know if you remember that, Auntie Donia, but he had a lot of people working on his team. And they spent so much time in our house that you kind of get to know them as a person, and you kind of get to understand what each of their special talents are, even beyond what their professional role is. And if you can kind of cultivate an appreciation of the things that they contribute to your family members' development, it can really make a difference in how well you're able to relate to them.
And I think it's remembering that it's a form of partnership. So it's not that they're coming in and telling you what to do. It's really how can you together foster a relationship to get the most and of most benefit for you and your super special kid. And I would say, Granny Rhea, that for most of us in this field, we do it because we love the work that we do and we love working with these super special kids and their families.
We do, but sometimes we're under pressure, aren't we, in terms of time and financial output, productivity restraints. So sometimes people who work with your child might be under certain kinds of pressure that you're not so happy about. I know parents can get angry about that and can feel betrayed if their child isn't awarded all the services and all the time that they feel the child deserves. It's a really tough situation for you as a parent. But I think what we feel is that the trust and the relationship really are important to build, even under those difficult circumstances, trying to find common ground. So if your therapist, for example, says, I have to cut your child back from 4 days a week to 2 days a week, and you're just appalled about this, maybe you can talk about what you can do in between to supplement or carry over what the therapist is doing.
And the other part of it too is when you've got several people working, they may not always be communicating as efficiently as perhaps you would like as well. So just supporting that in other ways. I mean, using, for example, like one of the families I work with, we use a WhatsApp group. So we have a group that's set up, and the therapist and the mum and the other mum, they share their different messages on the group, and it allows the team to be able to respond in a timely way, but it also removes the pressure of having to respond immediately. Because as you said, Granny Rhea, often, professionals working with super special kids are working with more than one super special. They're usually working with many. And when you've got a caseload of many children, as much as you want to allocate time, special time for each one, time can be a pressure as well.
I think that's a great idea, Auntie Donia, is to take advantage of the electronic resources that we have for us now. Particularly once your child gets to school, you may not see your child's teacher or team very often, but having a group that you can all communicate on about the child is a fabulous idea. The teacher can even post pictures of what the child's doing so you know what's going on in school. You can send questions. The teacher can send answers. We should really take advantage of those resources.
I've even found with some of the super special kids who, for them, talking is difficult, when they're doing sharing on a Monday morning, if you've sent in a photograph, it makes it much easier then for the child to remember what's happened at the weekend. And it's a really lovely way for the teacher to be communicating with you too, to better know what your personal family interests are too.
Yeah, we have so many more opportunities now these days to do that kind of communication. And I think it's a great thing when super special parents can take advantage of them to really build relationships with their team.
So, Granny Rhea, let's see what one of our listeners has sent us for today's super special question. So, today's super special question is, what do I do if my child wants to watch the same film over and over again, or wants to read the same book over and over again? And this is something that one of the mums of my super special kids had asked me, where her husband has autism, and she has two boys who also have autism too. And they were watching the same video clip of an airplane taking off and landing. Now, it didn't bother Dad and the two boys, but it really bothered Mum. And when we spoke about it, she said that it was frightening her that perhaps they wouldn't have any other interests, and that's all that they would be doing.
I can understand why Mom was frightened, but as you know, Donia, when we talk with super special kids, very often we can expand their interests by starting where they are. So Talk about what happened in this particular family.
Well, that's exactly what did end up happening. So we started off by, the same video of the airplane taking off and landing. But then we started looking at different types of planes. And then we looked at different airports. And the family liked to travel. So the boys started taking photographs of the different planes. So it shifted from watching the same video clip over and over again to only watching it a certain number of times and then watching other things, but then expanding their interests. So they started to learn about different countries, different airplanes, and then that even expanded to different modes of transport.
Yeah, that's exactly what we want to see happen with some of our super special kids who have these very intense interests. But even typically developing kids often get, I don't know if you want to call it stuck, but they get attached to a particular movie or a particular book. I'm sure you've known lots of 5-year-olds who love to watch Frozen over and over and over again to their parents' distraction. And sometimes they even memorize the script. As long as they are doing other things some of the time, there's really no harm in it. Some psychologists believe that what happens during this kind of repetitive exposure is mastery, that the child loves the subject so much that they want to have it in their head. I know for me, sometimes there are certain poems that I love so much that I want to memorize them, and that's a way for me to internalize them and have them with me all the time. I think the same impulse applies when kids want to read the same book over and over or watch the same movie over and over. As long as we can get them to do other things some of the time, there's really no harm in it.
There really isn't. I know that one of my nieces particularly likes reading a certain bedtime story. It's called The Snail and the Whale. And my other niece likes it, really enjoys it as well. And there's the familiarity, which also means that it's quite soothing and it helps prepare her for bedtime as well. And then it's a story which is really interesting. She started then incorporating into her play. So her mum had noticed in her pretend play that there's this snail and whale that go and visit different places. And if she wants to go and visit grandma, then, the snail and the whale go off and visit grandma as well.
Yeah, so typically developing kids do this too. Now, it can be distressing for parents of super special kids, especially if it seems to exclude other interests. But as Auntie Donia told us, it is possible to use this as a starting point and build on it by expanding interests outward. And as parents, sometimes that's a great strategy to have, and sometimes it can really help the child become a real expert in a certain area that they can then share with other children in school and use as a bridge to other children who might not share that more circumscribed interest.
And although we always recommend that we focus on the now, when you begin to develop interests as a young child, those hobbies and interests can actually become vocations. So for some of our super special kids, their knowledge that they have about trains or airplanes can then help them, because later on perhaps they could have a job in an airport terminal or at a train station where they're the ones that know all about the train times and can help people navigate where they need to be at a certain time.
Right. So repetitive interests in and of themselves are only difficult when they are a barrier to learning other new things. So we do want to try always to expand the child's interest while still respecting the things that draw them. Auntie Donia, there are so many myths and misconceptions in working with children with developmental disabilities. And some of them are so absurd, they just make us go, arghhh! You know what really makes me say, arghhh, Auntie Donia?
What's that, Granny Rhea?
People who try to teach kids eye contact. Oh my God. Would you want somebody staring at you?
Seriously.
No. When we work with super special kids who have difficulty with using gaze to regulate interactions, we don't want to just teach them to look at people. We want to teach them to use gaze to interact with people around objects and activities. So rather than saying, look at me, what we want to help children do is use objects to connect with people. So you might be sitting with your child playing with some objects and the child is really focused on the object rather than looking at you. So you might just pick that object up and hold it up near your face. So the child needs to look towards you in order to see the object and to see that you are also interested in it. You might then twiddle the object so that the child is more attracted to it, and when they are looking towards you, then give it to them. So the idea is that you want the child to not look at your face, you want them to look in a coordinated way. And even more than that, you want them to coordinate things like gestures and vocalizations with their eye gaze, so that if they're looking at you and they want that object, they realize that they can't just point at it or grab it. They have to look at you and point at it and grab it, so you know that they want it. And it's that coordination of gaze, gesture, and vocalization that we really want to encourage. We don't want to teach children to stare at other people.
One of the things that really bothers me, Granny Rhea, is when people hold a child's face and direct their face towards them. And yet, as you just shared, there are so many wonderful activities and games that you can play where the goal is achieved or taught. I mean, one of the things I love to do is to have a pot of bubbles and to hold the wand by my eyes, and when the child looks at me, that's when you blow the bubbles, and then you pop them together or you clap or stamp on them together. Another lovely thing that you can do as a family is when you're at the playground where you're swinging the child and you hold the swing, and then when they look at you or they smile, that's when you push the swing. So what you're really doing is you're teaching that social engagement. You're teaching them when we're engaged and when we're enjoying this activity together, and that looking is a communicative intent.
That's really the key, Auntie Donia, is that looking is not for looking's sake, but looking's for the sake of establishing joint attention, things that we share our attention to. And that joint attention is the foundation for all communication. We have to both be talking about the same thing in order to have a conversation. And we have to both be looking at the same thing in order to have an interaction. And that's where we want to guide our children. And we can use all kinds of tricks like holding things near our face and withholding things until the child looks toward us. But we don't have to force them to stare into people's eyes.
And when super special kids are a little older, sometimes looking and listening at the same time is difficult. So if they're sitting at carpet time and the teacher is talking, their body may be turned towards the teacher, but they may be looking down. And if you take a moment and you think of yourself, when you're listening to people, you're not always looking at them. You sometimes look away, you sometimes look to the side, but you're focused, your mind is focused on what's being said. And so instead, what we want to do is make sure that our super special kids know that they're reading the room, that they're listening to the teacher, and that they're listening to the cues, and that her body or his body sends a message.
Yes, I agree. That's the really important part. And I know lots of times when I'm listening, particularly if it's something that's complicated, I might just even close my eyes for a few seconds because I want to really focus on the words, on the auditory input, and I don't want to be distracted by what's out there in the physical world. One thing we know about eye contact, that is staring into someone else's eyes, is that for some reason it does stimulate anxiety. And that's probably the reason why children with autism initially avoid it. But it, like anything else, it can be trained and desensitized, but it has to be done in the context of meaningful interaction, not in this arbitrary look at my eyes for 2 seconds format.
Because you could look into somebody's eyes but receive no communicative interaction, or there may be no communicative exchange that takes place, and then we're just teaching a rote, redundant skill, which is, of course, what we want to avoid.
And it's not even an adaptive skill, because really, typically, developing people don't do that. They use gaze to organize interactions, not to just look blindly at someone else.
Granny Rhea, there is nothing wrong with eating cake for breakfast.
You are so right, Auntie Donia, and we're going to be talking about some things that are as much fun as eating cake for breakfast.
Our eating cake for breakfast topic is enjoying nature and getting dirty.
Getting getting dirty is the greatest thing that can happen to kids, isn't it, Auntie Donia?
It really is. I live opposite a forest in London, and one of my favourite things to do with my nieces and nephews, and I say favourite thing because I know they love to do this too, is we go into the forest as explorers, and we have these wonderful bug binoculars, and you can pick a little bug, put it into the binocular box. You can look through and see these magnified box, and then you can remove the little creatures and critters and return them back to their loving parents in the forest, which is what I do at the end of the day when I've had a wonderful time with my nieces and nephews.
And collecting things in nature is a wonderful activity. Most children do love collecting, even if it's just collecting dried leaves or twigs or pieces of moss. Many children enjoy just having those things around their rooms and letting them rot, and eventually mom gets rid of them. But for many children and for many super special children, those kinds of collections are a source of real enjoyment. So we want to make sure for our super special kids that they have the same opportunities as other kids to just mess around in nature, to get dirty, to hide behind things, to get out of mom's sight. Sometimes our super special kids have to be so protected that they never are allowed any independence. So part of enjoying nature is being in a place that's safe enough that they can go off on their own for a little bit, maybe walk a little bit on their own without their parent holding their hand. We want to kind of foster that independence as long as we're sure that the space is safe.
And one of the other things that can be really lovely about enjoying nature is doing some seasonal fruit picking. So going apple picking, or in England, we do a lot of strawberry picking. And for one of my super special kids, he actually joined us once on a strawberry picking expedition. And he's actually also a little bit of a picky eater. And it was just wonderful to watch him sort of be quite fascinated at how he could, pick these strawberries and put them in his little bucket. And another little one was with him as well. And she took a bite of the strawberry and he saw her do it and actually licked the strawberry and took a bite too. And to his mum's delight, he started eating strawberries with vegetables, which was a little odd for us, but he did.
Yeah, that's a great outcome for going on farm trips and going on hay rides, giving kids an opportunity to see where food comes from, that it doesn't just show up on the supermarket shelf. So many of our kids today, whether they're super special or not, really just have no idea where food comes from. I remember when my son was growing up, of course, he loved McDonald's, and I used to be coerced into taking him to McDonald's sometimes. And I remember once I said, do you want French fried potatoes? And he looked at me like I was crazy, and he said, they're not potatoes. They're French fries. They don't come from potatoes. He really had no idea where they came from. So it's a great idea for kids to see plants in the ground, grass turning into hay, corn cobs growing on stalks. All those things are really important for our super special kids to understand the world that they live in.
And just having that tactile experience is really so important. I know that some parents of super special kids sometimes are a little anxious about their children getting dirty. And it's the ability that when they can feel something, when they can smell something, that actually really helps them to learn the language and the words that go with that. So when the teacher later on or someone says to them, oh, this is very dry, they understand what that means because they've actually felt it and experienced it before.
And some super special kids don't like themselves to get dirty. They're kind of opposed to it. They're a little phobic about it. Modeling is a great way to show that it's really okay. If they still don't want to, that's fine. But very often you can help them discover new pleasures by modeling things that they might on their own reject at first. Because remember, super special kids need to have the same experiences that other kids do in order not only to grow up with cognitive skills, but also to develop the pleasures that the sensual world provides to us.
Granny Rhea, we have a really special treat today. So we have salted almond mini cupcakes, and they're made from almond flour with chocolate and salted caramel.
Oh my God, Auntie Donia, I can't tell you how much I love salted anything. Oh,
Likewise.
one
All
of the
right,
great inventions of our century.
let's go.
All right, here we go. Can you hear the almonds?
Oh my goodness,
Oh my God, those are great.
that's delicious. Okay,
Awesome.
right.
Bye, Auntie Donia.
Bye, Granny Rhea.
The Let's Talk About Super Special Kids and Cake podcast would like to thank our host, Sacred Heart University's School of Communication and Media Studies. We'd also like to thank our composer, Marty Eisenberg, our editor, Brent, and our audio engineer and director of cake-based operations, Matt Henshaw.